Hi, welcome to this video lesson in which we're going to talk about the protected users group. Once we discuss the protected users, we'll actually show a small demonstration that demonstrates a problem, or rather a feature. It's an expected behavior that occurs for members of this group, but what I've seen it across different environments is that it's causing a lot of troubles, and we'll look into that afterwards. So the protected users group, as stated by Microsoft, was designed as a part of a strategy to manage credential exposure and minimize that essentially the entire environment. Every member of this group automatically inherits certain protections that will prevent these accounts from caching credentials and essentially reducing the ability of an attacker to steal privileged users' credentials. Now, the group originally came in Windows Domains 2012 R2, and later it was backported to 2008 R2. Even though it was backported, some of the functionality is just partially there. It's not as good as in 2012. When we talk about protection by the protected users group, this protection is divided in two different categories or domains. That would be protection at the host device and protection at the domain level. Now, I'll go through these two domains just to show you the actual protection that the group provides. So from a host protection perspective, the credential delegation credSSP will no longer cache plaintext credentials of users at the endpoint, which was the case before. So if a user RDPs into a server, the credentials will be cached in plaintext. Right now, if a user RDPs, nothing is going to be cached at the LSAS process. So tools like Mimikatz, they should not be able to export any credentials of privileged users that are member of protected users. With Windows 8.1 and Server 2012 R2, WDGest will also not cache plaintext credentials when users are a member of this group. NTLM will not cache its NTLM hash, and that's just absolutely fantastic, because we're not talking about only not caching plaintext credentials, but we're also not caching NTLM password hashes. Then Kerberos will no longer use DES or RC4 for users that are member of this group. And this is where we start seeing problems, because many applications rely on, or they require RC4 to authenticate their users. And it's a whole different question of why would you have an administrative account needing access to an application such as something that requires RC4. But the fact is that in many enterprises, this is what people do. And when a user is a member of protected users, it might cause applications to not authenticate, or SSO will not work. I've seen multiple organizations where SSO broke immediately for users that were member of protected users, because that SSO relied on RC4 to be allowed in with Kerberos authentication. The next one that is problematic is that you can no longer sign to a machine that is not on the network. You need actively to contact a domain controller. So if you think about before, when you give a workstation to someone, you first ask them to sign in once, so their profile will be cached, and then they can sign offline afterwards as well. If you're a member of protected users, you cannot sign in offline. You can only sign when you're on the network. And with that, which also comes as domain protection, and we're going to see just in a second, is that NTLM authentication is not going to be allowed if you're a member of this group. So does this sound crazy? It probably does, because now we're really thinking and talking problems. Many tools and programs will utilize NTLM to authenticate. They just simply don't support Kerberos. Most common ones are VPN providers. So if you have a VPN, likelihood of it using NTLM is very high, and you will not be able to use that with a user that is member of protected users anymore. Because to authenticate with the VPN, well, you're obviously not on the network So you can't log in with Kerberos. You can't get your Kerberos ticket. That is a requirement now. Again, domain-wide, we are also blocking Kerberos pre-authentication with RC4 and DES. Something great that came afterwards was also that if you're a member of protected users, you cannot be delegated. So all the delegation attacks that we discussed with Kerberos delegation in the beginning of this course will be mitigated if a user is member of this group. But this protection is only for that user or the members of the group, not for the domain. And the last protection is that the Kerberos TGTs will need to be renewed after the initial 4-hour lifetime. Now, I want to show you how problematic it could be to get into a machine which is not on the domain network if you want to log in as a user that is a member of protected users. And this is not because it's problematic, it's more that it's something you should be aware of before going forward and having members of this group. And while I highly recommend you to go forward and have your privileged accounts being members of protected users, at least tier 0 to begin with, you should be careful while adding them and start by taking only a few accounts at a time instead of just taking all your accounts and adding them to this group, because you might end up in a position where you just simply lock out yourself of your Active Directory. Let's look into the demonstration. Begin by looking at the protected users group. It is located by default in the users OU. If I double click and look at members, I already added the account administrator of this domain to showcase with this account. Because this account is member of the group, now it automatically inherits all the protections that this group provides. And what we're going to see in here is that our domain level is, domain and force functional levels is 2016. So we are inheriting and benefiting from all the protections that this group provides. Now, I'll move away from the domain controller and go to a server. I'll try to log in with the account administrator, and as you'll see, there's no issues. Everything works as expected. My server is on the network. I can get on. And this login is now with Kerberos because NTLM is no longer allowed. Now, what I'm going to do is I will sign out and cut the network connection of this machine. That would be into my settings. I will just not have it connected. Now we can see immediately that the network changed. And even though you just saw that I had logged in with this account in the machine previously, if I try to do that now, I'm getting an error. The account cannot sign in. Now, this might not be very problematic with servers which are constantly on the network. It will be problematic with logging into workstations or devices which are not on your network. So having administrative accounts member of this group for users that require to log into a device offline is going to be very dangerous. Out of fairness, if only tier 0 are the only accounts that are members of protected users or the ones that you start with, you should never use that tier 0 account out of your network. You might need to do it during an emergency if you're urgently needed and you're at home, so you have to log in through a privileged admin workstation and access your environment. And that's where we'll keep our regular privileged admin workstation users not being member of this group to gain access to the network, but once we're in the network, we can utilize our protected users going forward.